You rise before the cockerel crows. The air that greets you is sharp, carrying the faint promise of cold and dampness. It smells primarily of wood smoke and the clean, earthy scent of straw from the neighboring roof thatch. You move slowly within the confines of your small room, the silence so profound it seems to press against your eardrums. Every footfall feels muffled by the thick quality of the pre-dawn darkness. You dress in worn wool clothes that have known countless washings and repairs. The texture is comforting but rough against your skin, a familiar weight settling over you as you pull on each garment. You take care not to rush these movements. There is no necessity for speed when the world has yet to demand it. Your attention focuses instead on the subtle give of the floorboards beneath your bare feet. The house remains cool, holding the chill of the night deep within its stone walls. As you move toward the low hearth area, a faint, almost imperceptible heat emanates from the sleeping embers, a promise of warmth to come. You kneel down and gather small pieces of kindling that have been stacked neatly beside the grate. They are dry, brittle sticks, smelling faintly of smoked oak. You select the most promising piece, testing its weight in your palm. It feels light, almost fragile, yet holds a memory of heat. The task requires patience. You must carefully arrange the small pieces to allow air circulation, ensuring that when they catch fire, the flame will be manageable and steady. This physical act is itself meditative, forcing your breath into a slow, deliberate rhythm. The smell of drying wood mixed with old ash becomes dominant as you attend to the embers. You scoop up a few more kindlings, stacking them methodically nearby. As you work, you observe the faint, silver light filtering through the small, oiled window pane. It is not daylight yet, but enough luminescence to prevent true blindness in the corners of your vision. Outside the open doorway, the street is barely visible, a dark, winding path leading away from your door. The air here feels more crisp, having cooled over the open expanse. You notice stray remnants on the cobbles, a discarded husk, perhaps, or a smudge of wet mud left by an early passing beast. These small details speak volumes about the quiet life that waits just beyond your immediate dwelling. You proceed to a low wooden shelf where simple bowls are kept for breakfast. The task of scooping and measuring out the grains is precise. You pour the coarse, pale meal into a pot suspended over the waiting fire. The dry grain makes a soft, whispering sound when it touches the metal bottom of the pot, a quiet rhythm that counterpoints the stillness. The need to prepare food anchors you fully in the immediate moment. Your focus narrows to the interplay between wood, water, and heat. You tend the nascent flame until it catches hold properly, coaxing the fragile kindling into steady burning. The initial lick of orange light spreads quickly, banishing a small pool of shadows from the hearth area. A warmth begins to creep up your forearms as you stand near the slowly growing fire. This physical sensation is grounding. It reminds you that life requires constant tending. The fire, the meal, and the self. You watch the flames dancing in their slow, mesmerizing pattern, a subtle display of controlled energy. It is at this point when the household starts to stir further around you. There is the rhythmic creak of a door opening across the way, or perhaps the muffled shuffle of feet on packed earth. These sounds are not startling. They are merely confirmations that life continues in its predictable pattern. You do not look up immediately to acknowledge them, instead maintaining your concentration on stirring the porridge gently. You recall the simple routine, the necessity of bringing sustenance to body and spirit alike before facing the demands of the day's labor. This measured pace is a form of quiet resistance against any sense of haste or panic. To move slowly is to feel fully present, anchoring yourself in the ritualistic rhythm of preparation. The steam from the cooking pot rises, carrying with it a scent that is both wholesome and distinctly yeasty. You carefully taste the porridge, adjusting the water until the consistency feels just right, thick enough to cling to the spoon, yet yielding when chewed. It speaks of basic sustenance, drawn straight from the earth. As you settle down with your simple breakfast, the rising light becomes slightly more assertive. The edges of objects are losing their velvety blackness and adopting soft shades of gray-blue. Outside, a few determined early birds begin to chirp, and the sound begins to layer over the faint crackle of wood burning in your hearth. The experience is one of quiet endurance. You gather strength not through grand gestures, but through these small, cumulative acts of care, building the fire, preparing the meal, enduring the deep silence. It is an appreciation for the necessary groundwork that allows all later activity to take place. The world remains shrouded in a pale, expectant hush, waiting for the true dawn to break and illuminate the paths ahead. The lingering damp chill of the pre-dawn air has not quite left your bones, but the gentle rise of the sun promises a warmth that is long overdue. You begin by drawing closer to the hearth stone, feeling the slight difference in temperature under your worn boots. The coals banked last night still glow with a deep, tired red, an enduring memory of heat. This fire is not merely for cooking. It is the living heart of this small space. A slow breath kept going against the morning's inevitable cold. You take a handful of dried oak kindling, the wood smelling sweetly of forest dust and faint smoke residue. You arrange these delicate pieces carefully over the glowing embers, gently encouraging them to catch fire again. The process requires patience. You know better than to smother the fragile rebirth with too much force. You use the poker not as a weapon, but as an extension of quiet intention, coaxing the heat back into the wood fibers until they begin to whisper, a faint, brittle crackle that sounds immense in the hush of the early hour. As the main fire takes hold, you move to the stores. You gather your earthenware pot and examine it for any imperfections, running a thumb along its cooled rim. Its weight feels familiar and reassuring in your hand. The preparation for the morning meal is an act of measured domestic rhythm. You measure out a small portion of coarsely ground grain, barley or perhaps spelt, the kernels clicking softly against the stone bowl. This sound, repetitive and gentle, seems to sync with the slow deepening of the red glow radiating from the fire pit. The scent of the simmering water begins to mingle with the wood smoke, creating the rich, comforting perfume unique to this threshold time. You wait, watching the surface of the porridge gradually thicken, its pale yellow color reflecting the flickering orange light of the hearth. This waiting period is perhaps the most philosophical part of any morning routine. It demands stillness and trust in slow transformation. You shift your attention away from the immediate task for a moment, allowing your eyes to adjust to the burgeoning daylight streaming through the single oiled window pane. The world outside has not yet fully awakened, existing in a soft, muted wash of gray and deepening blue. You notice the way the dust motes dance, visible only when caught in this nascent light, performing their silent, random ballet in the air. It is an effortless movement, completely detached from human effort or purpose. A quiet shift occurs as you hear the distant sound, not a shout or a clatter, but a single, resonant lowing of livestock calling toward the fields. This natural chime acts like a subtle clock, signaling that the rhythm of the town is about to increase. You feel the collective stirring energy begin to permeate the walls. The quiet domestic sphere is preparing to rejoin the larger, more complicated life outside. The porridge is ready now, thick and steaming. You scoop it into a simple wooden bowl, the moisture clinging momentarily to your fingers. Taking a careful portion of coarse bread slices, Lightly warmed over the coals until they puff up just slightly, you sit on the low stool near the hearth. The act of eating, at this early hour, is deeply grounding. You eat slowly, focusing not only on the taste, the earthy blend of grain and heat, but also on the physical sensation of nourishment settling into your core. As you lift a spoonful to your mouth, you observe the patterns formed by the rough wooden table beneath your forearm. The grain lines, worn smooth by generations of hands, hold the accumulated story of countless similar meals, the start of so many routine days. These objects, seemingly solid and unchanging, bear witness to time's ceaseless passage. The kitchen's quiet activity begins to crescendo around you. You hear the rhythmic scraping sound from another part of the house, perhaps a neighbor preparing bread or chopping wood. There are whispers, voices that have not yet acquired the volume or sharpness of midday exchanges, but hold the low, conspiratorial quality of things shared before others rise. These sounds build a curtain of human presence, a warm blanket over your solitude. You finish your meal, wiping your fingers on a scrap of linen. The warmth from the hearth now seems to emanate outwards, an invisible field of steady comfort. You straighten yourself, feeling the mild stiffness in your joints begin to loosen with the slow heat and the steady intake of breath that accompanies routine. A gentle understanding settles over you regarding the power of simple sustenance. It is not just filling an empty stomach. It is acquiring the quiet resilience needed to navigate the day's demands. You notice how the window light has changed, deepening its color from pale gray to a more assertive gold. The boundary between the internal peace of the home and the demanding life outside becomes sharper with every minute. The hearth fire needs attention again. You gather some smaller pieces of kindling, thin splinters that catch quickly. This sustained tending of the flame is an act of quiet maintenance, both literal and metaphorical. A dying ember or a damp corner could extinguish everything. Similarly, a day's momentum requires constant, careful feeding. As you stack these small woods, you observe the detail of your own hands, the faint calluses on your palms, the subtle ridges of skin that map years of labor. They are tools, yes, but they are also records. Each line and chip holds a memory of wood, grain, or rough spun cloth. You take one last moment to breathe deeply in the mingled scent, the sweet smoke of burning oak, the yeasty tang of warming bread, the faint mineral scent of the stone hearth. It is the smell of endurance. The day requires effort, movement, and observation, but it begins here, within this circle of enduring warmth, anchored by these predictable, comforting rituals. The rising light has now fully illuminated the room, chasing away the deepest shadows into corners where the dust motes still briefly glitter before being swept clean by a steady, gentle draft. You are dressed, you are fed, and the quiet dignity of this morning ritual prepares you not just for work, but for the simple act of existing within the rhythm of another life. The simple woven basket handles a little sweat, still tacky from the moisture of the morning. You adjust your grip on it, feeling the slight strain in your knuckles. The rhythmic tap-tap of your wooden soles against the cobblestones is the only steady beat accompanying your measured pace. It is not a brisk walk. Rather, it is a procession, a slow unfolding through the narrow artery of the town. Ahead, the passage narrows further, forcing you to adjust your gait slightly as a small cart laden with smoked fish wobbles past, brushing the rough wool of your tunic. You do not meet the eye of the man guiding the cart. Instead, your focus remains fixed on the pattern of discoloration in the stones before you, tracing an imagined line from one worn heel mark to the next. These stones have held countless shoes, soft leather, hardened boots, bare feet, and they tell a silent story only if you choose to listen closely enough. The air here is dense and layered with competing smells. The earthy tang of spilled pig manure mixed with the sharper zest of drying herbs hanging from a beam overhead. Near your elbow, you notice a small pile of glistening dung that has been gathered up for use as fertilizer. It carries a deep, primal scent, unavoidable in this crowded passage. You continue walking, letting the smells wash over you without judgment. The architecture presses close around you, walls built of rough-hewn stone and timber beams that look perpetually wet, giving the whole passageway a cool, damp feel, even though the sun is beginning its ascent higher above the rooftops. As you pass by one of the heavier wooden doors, you can see the minute carving at the lintel, perhaps a saint's name or an animal in profile, evidence of years of simple artistry. You slow your pace just momentarily to observe this carving, recognizing how much effort goes into such small details, how these mundane markings transform mere wood into something imbued with intention and meaning. A slight puff of warm breath escapes you when you realize the change in air pressure as you turn a corner. The sounds deepen here, not just footsteps, but the muffled clang of metal on stone from somewhere further up the lane, perhaps a blacksmith at work already beginning his rhythm. This industrial sound weaves itself into the background noise, blending with the lower murmur of voices, the preliminary calls and acknowledgments exchanged between neighbors passing each other. You greet one woman who is carrying 2 baskets of freshly gathered laundry, nodding once, keeping your gaze directed toward the ground or ahead. The exchange is brief, a mutual recognition that requires little effort, but affirms the continuity of communal life. It reminds you that every journey through this town, whether for bread or for work, is always shared, interwoven with the paths of others. Your muscles begin to adjust slowly to the steady resistance of walking, maintaining a rhythm that feels neither rushed nor sluggish, but simply persistent. You feel the weight of your basket settle comfortably against your hip, its contents shifting slightly with each careful step. As you approach the main thoroughfare leading toward the market quarter, the sounds intensify again. The calls are louder now, fresh figs, sweet bread, punctuated by the occasional sharp bark of a dog or the rhythmic sweep of a broom. You lift your eyes briefly, letting the full span of the waking streetscape take in before directing your focus forward again. Everything seems washed in a pale, silvery light, slightly diffused by whatever haze lingers between the buildings. The journey is not about reaching a destination. It is simply the measured traversal of time and space that leads you towards the center of your day's work. You settle into the familiar rhythm of movement. Left foot, right heel scrape, lift, repeat. This walking becomes a quiet form of meditation, each step grounding you more deeply in the physical reality of the town, connecting your body to the enduring cycle of its routine life. Finally, after passing a stall stacked high with dark wooden barrels, perhaps holding wine or olive oil, their scent now joining the confluence of odors, the distinctive roofline of your workshop appears. It is slightly set back from the main flow of traffic, distinguished by a particular shade of weathered blue paint on the lower half of its facade. The change in ambient noise is palpable as you near it. The cacophony seems to drop into a more focused, steady hum. You slow your steps further, anticipating the familiar routine within these walls. The walk concludes not with a flourish, but with a gradual easing back into a specialized environment, preparing your mind and body for the methodical patience of craft. You arrive at your designated corner, the familiar feel of aged stone beneath your worn shoes giving way to the specific grit accumulated over decades. This place is both fixed and transient, marked by the simple persistence of human commerce. You do not need grand fanfare or even much effort to recognize it. only the slight discoloration of the lintel above you, perhaps, or the particular slant of afternoon dust that settles near your bench. You settle onto a low wooden stool, an object as worn and predictable as yourself. Before you are the materials and the implements, the cedar shavings, the coils of tanned hide, the fine pile of raw wool, depending on your trade. They rest in carefully arranged piles, each organized by its potential utility, waiting for the patient touch that knows exactly what comes next. The first movement is always the same, a slight adjustment of posture, sinking into the familiar groove of the routine. Your hands reach out, not dramatically, but with an inevitability, selecting the specific tool needed for this moment. Perhaps a narrow-boned stylus, cool and smooth from repeated handling, or a finely oiled blade whose edge has known nothing but patient work. You lift it up, testing its weight, feeling the perfect balance meant to extend your will into the inanimate object. The scent of your craft rises subtly around you. If you are working with leather, there is the deep, earthy smell of tannins and curing smoke. If it is wood carving, the faint, sweet musk of aged sap mingling with sharp dust. It is a personal aromatherapy, unique to this small stretch of cobbled alleyway. You look down at your hands. They are not the smooth, pampered hands of leisure, but they hold their history in the creases and calluses, maps charting every task completed since you were able to grip a tool independently. Each line tells a story of repetition, of mastering resistance, of transforming raw potential into useful form. The initial work is slow. You do not rush the first cut, nor speed up the first stroke. There is an entire philosophy embedded in the beginning. The materials must be understood, their grain, their tensile strength, or their inherent weakness revealed slowly by light pressure. A whisper of resistance is all that should meet your tool at this stage. You bend over your bench, allowing the angle to feel natural, comfortable. Your focus narrows down until everything outside the immediate plane of work, the passers-by, the distant cries, the occasional clatter from a nearby stall, seems muffled and unimportant. The world shrinks to the precise point where metal meets material. The first rhythmic motion begins then. It is not effortful but meditative. A gentle scraping sound, a steady, whispering rasping, or perhaps the slick slide of an all-through stacked hide. You are attuned to this tiny, repetitive sound, allowing it to become the metronome for your breathing. Your breath deepens just slightly with each pass, syncing itself to the pace of the hand movements. You observe the material as you work. Notice how the light catches the fine dust settling on the finished pieces, momentarily glittering like captured pollen. Observe the way the edges, once jagged and unruly, begin to soften under your deliberate shaping. It is a process of polite civilization, guiding something wild toward utility. If there are other artisans nearby, you become acutely aware of their presence without needing to look up sharply or acknowledge them with fanfare. You perceive them as part of the slow, great, communal hum, a backdrop choir composed of hammers tapping, wheels creaking, and the occasional sigh of effort. Each neighboring craft contributes a specific tonal color to the day's soundscape. You take a deliberate pause after completing a small section, perhaps securing a perfect dovetail joint or finishing a symmetrical panel on a piece of wood. You do not immediately move on to the next task. Instead, you simply lift your gaze and survey what you have accomplished. You might brush away some stray shavings from the bench surface, collecting them into a neat, biodegradable pile. This act of inspection is key. It allows you to appreciate the accumulated effort, to mentally catalog the small victories of muscle memory. This isn't merely work. It is a structured meditation that pays for bread and shelter. As the afternoon progresses, the sun begins its gradual arc westward, causing the quality of light filtering into your corner to change subtly. It shifts from the bright intensity of noon, which can be harsh on the eyes and demanding on the material, to a warmer, more honeyed glow. This golden filter seems to soften the edges of everything, including the minor imperfections in your tools. You find yourself noticing details you had previously overlooked. A minute pattern carved into the stone wall just beside your workspace, the particular hue of moss growing beneath an overhang, the way the dust settles differently on a surface depending on its slope. These peripheral observations anchor you deeper into the moment, reminding you that while your focus is intensely interior, you remain deeply rooted in this specific time and place. The rhythm becomes almost hypnotic. You might start with a repetitive series of small, fine passes, polishing a curve, or smoothing the nap on newly worked fabric. The physical task requires little intellectual exertion, but demands continuous concentration, which itself acts as a powerful mental shield against worry about tomorrow or yesterday's missteps. You feel the steady warmth developing in your wrists and forearms from the constant, controlled movement. This gentle ache is not a signal of distress, but rather a satisfying affirmation of productivity, the quiet reward for staying anchored to the task at hand. The hours drift by with this measured grace. You are entirely enveloped by the geometry of effort. Every tool handles an inherent history. They were made, used, and polished thousands of times before your hands ever gripped them. To use them is to participate in a vast continuum of human ingenuity. Eventually, when your bench holds several completed pieces, each bearing that subtle, uniform evidence of focused, disciplined labor, the natural slowing begins again. You pause one last time, not because you must, but because the body and mind simply demand this gentle deceleration. You wipe down your tools meticulously with a damp rag. Every crease in the wood, every sharp point on metal, is wiped clean, prepared for the resting night. The quiet sense of satisfaction settles over you, not a loud, bursting pride, but a deep, steady hum, like the sustained note of an unstrung instrument. You look at the collected goods and realize that these small items represent not just material value, but time properly spent. It is the satisfying weight of purpose carried away with your hands. You finally push back from the bench, the simple scrape of wood on stone sounding surprisingly loud in the softening afternoon quiet. The day's craft has been mastered for now, giving way to the next necessary movement, leaving the sheltered focus of the workshop and joining the greater rhythm of the town as the light continues its slow decline. The afternoon sun, having climbed high enough to wash the market square in a bright, unblinking gold, seems to draw warmth from your fingertips simply by being there. You have paused your rhythmic work at the bench, allowing your hands and eyes to adjust to this wider, open light. The corner of your workshop feels suddenly deep and quiet compared to the expansive clamor just steps away. Slowly, you leave the careful measure of your craft, stepping out into the flow of midday life. It is not an urgent departure, but a gentle meandering, drawn by the sheer texture of the crowd. You move toward the central square, the cobblestones warm beneath your worn boots after hours on the rough wood floor of your workspace. The air feels thick today, carrying a complex bouquet of scents that blend seamlessly together. There is the sharper tang of brine from fish being sold, mixed with the deep, dusty aroma of cured leather, and underneath it all always, the grounding scent of human life, sweat mingled with smoke. You walk slowly, letting your gaze wander over the scene unfolding around you. You do not hurry to observe anything specific. Rather, you allow the entire visual field to wash over you like a slow painting. Notice how the merchants arrange their goods in pyramids and careful stacks, bunches of deep purple grapes next to mounds of earthy turnips, all vying for attention under the sharp sun. Each stall is its own small world of necessary commerce. A woman near your elbow carries a heavy basket woven from river reeds, its contents covered by a loose linen cloth. You observe the slight, determined swing of her hips as she navigates the crowd, the way the weight affects her gait, making each step deliberate and steady. Her footsteps are rhythmic, almost counter-tempo to the sharper, quicker tread of a boy running an errand. It is here, in this flow, that you notice the subtle performance of daily life. People do not simply exist. They perform small roles. The seller with his dramatic pronouncements, the buyer who examines apples as if they hold ancient secrets, the children chasing dust motes kicked up by passing cartwheels. You stop briefly near a stall piled high with colorful textiles. The merchant leans against a wooden counter, seemingly overseeing everything while actually engaging in nothing particular. His eyes drift over passers-by, meeting your gaze only for a flash, assessing you quickly and then dismissing the moment. You study the patterns of the cloth, a geometric repeat of indigo and ochre, dyed with local plants, and contemplate the journey these threads took to arrive here, passed from weaver to dye master. Across the square, two men are engaged in an animated negotiation over a stall selling spices. One man gestures broadly with his hands, counting out imaginary grains of cinnamon, while the other responds with sharp, knowing nods. You listen not so much for the words, but for the cadence, the rise and fall of voices that convey both frustration and eventual compromise. These small transactions are the sinews holding the community together. You feel yourself becoming accustomed to the constant stream of movement and sound. Your focus shifts from individual details to the overall rhythm. It is a complicated, beautiful tapestry woven from thousands of tiny, momentary encounters. The rattle of ceramic pots being stacked, the low bleating of tethered goats near the edge of the square, the high, nasal call of a man advertising smoked eels. Passing by a baker's cart, you inhale deeply. The rich, yeasty smell of cooling loaves mixed with burnt charcoal hangs in the air. It is a grounding, intensely comforting scent that speaks directly to the basic human necessity of sustenance. You note how the baker gestures towards his goods, crumbs dusted across the worn wooden counter, suggesting abundance and generosity even as he calculates the day's profit. Midday naturally encourages a certain sort of public performance, the art of seeming deeply engaged in one's own thoughts or activities, while simultaneously being acutely aware of every movement around you. You find yourself adopting this quiet practice. Your attention settles on something distant and unassuming, like an elderly gentleman slowly examining the texture of a stone plinth near the central fountain. You slow your pace as you approach the edge of the square, where a large, ornate stone trough meant for washing hands or cooling livestock sits. The water there is still, reflecting the harsh blue patches of sky and the intense greens of potted herbs nearby. You notice how passers-by often cast quick glances toward this central point, using its relative stillness as an anchor amidst the swirling energy. The light hitting the stone seems to magnify every small imperfection, the greenish patina where water has gathered over decades, the faint scratch marks left by a careless boot heel, the way lichens grow in patches of stubborn color. It is here that the architectural details speak volumes about the longevity of the place, resisting the quick decay demanded by modern lives. You pause for a moment longer than necessary, simply watching the sunlight catch the spray from a water vendor who occasionally cups his hands and lets out a controlled splash. The resulting arc of water catches the light brilliantly, momentarily transforming the mundane act into something fleetingly magical. It is in these quiet pockets, These small decelerations within the constant motion, that you are most present. You observe how different people carry themselves, some with a proud, upright carriage that suggests lineage or comfort, others with a slight stoop, suggesting long hours spent bending over work. Each posture tells a story before any word is spoken. The passage of time in the market square feels strangely elastic. Moments stretch out while you are observing the careful negotiation between two fishmongers. Minutes seem to evaporate as you realize the sun has shifted noticeably since your initial pause at the textile stall. The rhythm of life here does not follow a precise clock, but rather a deep breath, a cycle of energy expended and then gently absorbed before resuming. You continue to walk without destination, allowing the collective humanity around you to become a meditation. You realize that this continuous state of gentle observation is, itself, a kind of necessary work. It keeps your mind quiet, observant, and attuned to the delicate complexities of life. The market remains bustling until the heat begins its slow, inevitable retreat, cooling the very scent in the air and preparing the day for its next shift toward the afternoon's deeper moments. The exchange of goods continues, fueled by habit and necessity, giving you a profound, quiet understanding of the relentless, beautiful choreography of routine. You find a place to pause, near the edge of the square where the great stone fountain rises. It is not dramatic or overwhelming, simply a steady presence in the constant flow of life. You lean against the cool, damp granite of a nearby structure, letting your body settle into an easy weight. The midday sun, though strong, does not hit you directly. Instead, it filters through the canopy of old chestnut trees planted along the perimeter, breaking into small, moving patches of light and shadow that dance on the uneven paving stones beneath your worn sandals. The air here is a composite scent, the sharp, metallic tang of the fountain water splashing ceaselessly against its basin, the faint, earthy musk of damp stone. Underneath it all, the sweet, yeasty perfume carried by breezes from the nearby baking ovens. You close your eyes for a moment and just listen to this layered quietude. The rhythmic splash is the dominant sound, almost hypnotic, masking the sharper noises of human transaction. A small shadow drifts over you, cast by one of the taller chestnut leaves swaying in an imperceptible current of air. Observing these patches of light is a quiet meditation on time itself, a constant record of movement against stillness. You open your eyes again and look up at the sky visible between the eaves of the surrounding buildings. The cloud cover moves with surprising deliberation, slow sheets of white passing over the deep blue expanse. This effortless drift reminds you that even the most solid-seeming things, like this bustling town square or the stone fountain itself, are subject to grander, slower cycles. The people continue their rounds, a slow, meandering river of life flowing around your momentary pause. Some trudge past, bent over bundles of roots. Others walk with a brisk, purposefulness that speaks of appointments and deadlines. You watch an old woman carefully adjusting the linen covering her head, a gesture that seems as ingrained in her being as breathing. Beside her, a child runs, chasing dust motes kicked up by the hooves of a stray donkey. It is not chaos. It is a complex pattern of human survival woven into a daily tapestry. You consider the source of the fountain's water, a steady flow that has been channeled and contained for perhaps centuries. This engineered element mirrors the natural cycles you are observing. The river itself, beyond the immediate hustle of the square, murmurs secrets only those who pause to listen can catch. The deeper current passing beneath the city foundations, pulling steadily toward its eventual destination. You feel a connection to this enduring flow, realizing that human lives, like the water, are temporary movements within an endless system. The rhythm of the market provides natural benchmarks for time. When the hawker selling cured meats calls out his price, a measured, slightly breathless chant, you mark a passing segment of the afternoon. When the vegetables seller stacks pyramids of richly colored cabbages and peppers, you notice how light catches the waxy skin of the greens, making them seem almost luminous against the rough wood of their stall. Each stack, each colorful pile, represents sustenance and labor, tying every passing moment to the simple necessity of remaining alive. Your attention drifts back to the fountain. You realize that the water does not simply fall. It seems to perform a ritualistic descent, gathering strength from its source, breaking into smaller splashes upon impact, and then rising again as fine mist kissed by the sun's warmth. It is a perfect cycle of giving and receiving energy. You feel the heat gradually building, shifting from the cool shade where you rested to the dappled warmth on your exposed forearms. This physical sensation anchors you firmly in the present moment. The smell changes too, subtly becoming thicker with the day's accumulated scents. Sweat mixed with spilled spices, warm bread crusts, and the cleaner, sharper scent of soap used by a passing laundress. You take another deep breath, absorbing the confluence of smells and sounds. These sensory details are not merely background noise. They are the markers of existence itself. They tell you who has passed here, what they have done, and what time it is. To live in this moment is to be saturated by them. The passage of time, you realize, is much less a measurement on a clock face and far more an accumulation of these small moments. The gradual deepening of shadow under an archway, the slow slump of dust from a corner roof tile, the almost imperceptible shift in the crowd's density as the afternoon progresses. You walk away from the fountain, not with urgency, but with the gentle pull of an ongoing tide. The purpose of this pause was merely to recalibrate your senses, to remember that life is governed by much older rhythms than human scheduling. These townspeople are performing a continuous dance between necessity and routine, all underpinned by the steady heartbeat of natural processes. The rising and setting of the sun, the flow of water, the growth of food. The knowledge of these cycles settles upon you like a comfortable cloak, a recognition that even your skilled craft, the meticulous carving or the practiced stitch, is merely participating in an ancient rhythm. You continue onward, carrying with you this heightened awareness of the environment, ready for the next stage of the day's slow unveiling. The afternoon heat has softened into a more humid quiet. You continue your steady walk through the market area, but the intense rush of commerce seems to have settled into a deep rhythm, like water flowing over worn stones. Instead of focusing on buying or selling, you simply allow yourself to drift with the current of people, slowing your pace until it feels almost meditative. Your attention begins to lift away from your feet and the ground beneath them, moving instead toward the deeper layers of local understanding that permeate this place. You notice how certain conversations are punctuated not by sheer volume, but by specific shared knowledge. An older woman pauses beside a stack of bright indigo linens, her gaze momentarily resting on you. She speaks softly about the necessity of always carrying an amulet against ill fortune, mentioning a particular herb only known to those who live close to the river bend. As she speaks, her voice is woven with the texture of local lore, tales that feel as much part of the air as the smells, the mix of wood smoke and baked earth. These are not grand histories taught from scrolls, but whispers passed down from mother to daughter, shaping how people view everything from a coming rainstorm to an unfamiliar sickness. You remember passing by a small niche shrine dedicated to a patron saint of travelers. The paint on the niche is faded, chipped away by centuries of hands touching it and weather beating against it. You observe the fresh offerings laid at the base, wilting flowers, a carefully tied scrap of cloth, and perhaps a tarnished copper coin. These objects are physical reminders that the human belief system here is deeply practical. Magic and piety often mix into one gentle stream guiding daily life. The weight of these localized traditions settles around you. The deep sense that everything done in this small corner of the world has its corresponding ritual, a minor prayer or superstition attached to it. You pass by a baker whose stall displays loaves marked with simple protective symbols drawn in flour. A careful spiral here, 3 connected dots there. It is not merely decoration. It is a whispered plea for prosperity and safety. You find yourself observing how these beliefs intertwine with the everyday actions around you. A child does not simply splash water from the fountain. Before they do, they might briefly whisper a short rhyme or touch a specific stone, a small ritual meant to ensure safe play. This is living folklore, seamlessly integrated into the rhythm of life. The air seems thicker here, carrying the scent of rosemary mixed with aged incense smoke. You slow your passage near an artisan's stall selling charms and herbs. He holds up bundles of dried lavender, telling a gentle story about how the plant must be harvested under the light of the new moon to hold its purest protective power. It is not merely an explanation. It is part of the purchase, part of the lesson in local knowledge. You reflect on the profound, comforting nature of these established beliefs. They provide invisible threads that tie the unpredictable chaos of existence, ill health, poor harvests, uncertain travel, to a predictable pattern of belief and action. These traditions do not forbid change. Rather, they give meaning to the changes that already occur. They are a soft netting cast over life, providing both guidance and solace. The concept unfolds like a patterned textile. You look at the market stall selling dried river reeds. Its purpose is functional, yet the vendor insists it must be blessed by touching it to running water on certain holy days. You observe an old woman carefully arranging small pebbles in a specific, concentric pattern near her doorway, believing that this pattern will deflect bad luck from her threshold. You realize how these minute details of shared belief require constant attention and quiet participation simply to maintain the social fabric. They are passed down through murmurs of warning whispered to young ears, or through the careful remembering of which saint is invoked when a fever takes hold, or what offering must be made before beginning a harvest. This understanding makes your own routine actions feel layered with meaning. When you bend down to pick up an interesting stone near the well basin, it is not just geological curiosity. Perhaps you are mentally acknowledging some ancient local belief about stones and memory. The simple act of moving requires considering these invisible layers, the local understandings that govern what feels safe, what tastes right, or how one should greet a stranger. You take another moment to watch the movement in the square. People move with a studied grace, often glancing briefly at architectural details, a specific carving on a pillar, a worn section of paving stone, as if seeking confirmation from the inanimate world. They are constantly referencing the established order, both visible and unseen. It is this pervasive sense of localized meaning that makes the town feel so wonderfully rich, even in its ordinariness. The belief system here is not a spectacle. It is simply how life breathes, one soft, ritualized exhalation after another, grounding all your simple movements in a deep historical continuity. You continue walking, carrying this quiet understanding with you, feeling less like an observer and more like a temporary participant in the town's enduring narrative. The intensity of the midday sun, which had been beating down upon your hands and shoulders all morning, begins a slow process of abatement. It does not leave abruptly, but rather filters through the close-set buildings, diffusing into a thick, warm haze. You feel the familiar urge to simply stop, to let the accumulated sounds and motions of the day wash away in a soft wave of quietude. Around you, the flow of life continues. A child's sudden laughter echoes from an alleyway. A donkey's hooves clatter against the worn cobbles, but the immediate rhythm slows down for you. You realize that moments like this are not mere gaps between tasks. They are necessary points of stillness, periods needed to reset the pace and remember the subtle undercurrents of existence. You slip from your main workspace and find a small bench tucked into the deep shadow cast by the corner shop of a spice merchant. The wood of the bench is cool beneath you, possessing a faint scent of cedar mingled with dried oregano. The air here feels different from the open market square, less vibrant but deeply comforting. It holds the accumulated smells of all the passing trade: cinnamon and cumin, damp straw, and sun-baked earth, a complex, musky perfume unique to this quarter of the city. You settle your weight onto the bench, allowing your limbs to find a steady place against the slight coolness emanating from the stone wall behind you. Your muscles, taut from hours of focused work, begin to unwind almost imperceptibly. It is less an active rest than a passive surrender to the passing warmth. You notice how the light behaves now that you are under cover. The fierce glare is replaced by a liquid gold patina that catches on dusty cobwebs and makes the colorful heaps of dried herbs in the spice shop glow softly. This softened illumination seems to invite introspection, encouraging the eyes to rest rather than darting from point to point. The steady sounds surrounding you begin to take on greater definition. The soft thud of a merchant closing his shutters is accompanied by the gentle whisper of dry canvas being dragged across stone. A distant bell rings out, perhaps marking the time for prayer or simply calling workers back to their stalls. These ambient noises layer one upon another, creating a kind of sonic blanket that muffles the sharp edges of any single sound. You consider the necessity of this pause. It is not a luxury, but a structural component of the day itself. The human body and mind require these gentle reprieves to process the dense input of sensory life. Before this rest, your movements were governed by the rhythm of demand. The need for craft, the flow of coin, the expectation of routine. Now, there is only permission to simply be. A small book, bound in weathered leather and protected by brittle mica covers, rests near your knee. Though you do not immediately reach for it, the mere presence of paper and ink suggests a deeper kind of stillness. The quiet pursuit of recorded thought, contrasting with the immediate clamor of trade life surrounding you. You observe the careful way the merchant across the narrow lane sweeps dust into a small pile, making neat little arcs in the grit. The rhythmic shush scrape is mesmerizing in its predictability. You let your gaze drift past the stall and focus on the details. The pattern etched into the lip of the fountain basin nearby. The subtle discoloration on the cobblestones where centuries of rain and foot traffic have worn away the original polish. A stray patch of resilient moss growing in a crevice, stubbornly green against the gray stone. It is an exercise in slow visual intake. You examine the interplay of shadow and object, the way a particular beam of light catches the metallic sheen of a brass hook hanging from the shop eaves. This detail demands nothing but observation. It asks for no decision, no action, just noticing. The sensation in your chest changes, too. The early morning's practical focus on sustenance and labor gives way to a quieter kind of steady warmth, the quiet confidence found in deep rest. You are nourished not by food, nor even by the satisfying exhaustion of physical exertion, but by this moment of uninterrupted sensory absorption. You take a slow, shallow breath, letting it expand your diaphragm fully before releasing it slowly through pursed lips. The air tastes faintly metallic, mixed with the sweet undertone of cooling spices. You are anchored here, physically and mentally, in this quiet eddy within the current of urban life. There is nothing urgent enough to pull you away from the observation of a vendor arranging small bundles of colorful dried flowers. Each bloom is placed with deliberate care next to its neighbor, reds beside ochres, deep indigos near pale yellows. You recognize that even in simple commerce, there is an inherent art, the aesthetic arrangement that makes the goods more appealing than their mere utility. The world continues its murmuring motion around you. The voices remain a constant background hum, like the gentle churn of river water, never reaching a dramatic crescendo, yet always present. You feel connected to this rhythm in a profound, understated way. This siesta is not just about sleeping. It is about deeply accepting the cycle of ebb and flow that defines all existence. The gathering of energy during morning toil, the heightening of activity at midday, and now, this gentle withdrawal before the evening's pace begins. Allowing your thoughts to wander with the slow descent of the afternoon light is a quiet discipline. You reflect on how life seems structured by these cycles, rising into focused labor, gathering knowledge in public spaces, and then needing this profound slowing down. It reminds you that efficiency does not equate to intensity. True sustenance comes from pacing oneself correctly, accepting the necessary moments of void between activity. The sun shifts slightly overhead, changing the quality of light hitting the dusty street floor. Suddenly, a patch of shadow moves swiftly, the passing cloud high above casting temporary coolness across your bench. You watch the moving edge of that momentary darkness retreat back into the yellow haze, a subtle reminder that nothing stays exactly as it is for any length of time. This gentle impermanence gives peace to the mind. You observe the details on your hands, the faint calluses from the tools, the fine dust under the nails, the lines mapped onto your palms by years of work. These marks are physical records of disciplined effort. You trace one line with a fingertip, recognizing it not as weariness, but as accumulated skill, the map of a lifetime spent in careful service to a craft. The feeling that settles over you is one of deep acceptance. The day has asked much of your attention, and this period grants permission to merely receive the sensory information. The scent of sandalwood from the nearby stall, the distant cry of a gull carried on a mild breeze, the coolness of the stone against your skin. It is a quiet recharging that makes the return to activity later in the day feel sustainable and gentle, like drawing strength from underground springs. The bright clarity of the midday sun has begun its slow decline, softening the sharp edges of the market square. You find yourself near the main thoroughfare, where small specialized shops cluster together, creating a dense layer of commercial life that feels distinct from the open buzz of the central plaza. These are places of necessary transition, where goods accumulate and accounts are settled before the final preparations for the evening draw things inward toward home. You walk slowly now, letting your pace match the measured steps of those around you. Your attention drifts to a spice merchant's stall, draped low with colorful sacks that spill over onto the worn cobblestones. The air here is thick with a medley of dry smells, cinnamon fighting faintly with bruised herbs, overlaid by the sharper scent of curing hides and warm wool. You do not approach the stall directly, but pause at the edge, merely allowing your eyes to register the deep ochre yellows and rich reds of the imported powders. It is an observation that requires little effort, yet holds a great deal of quiet detail. The spice merchant, a man with hands stained permanently yellow from turmeric dust, is arranging small glass jars of peppercorns, each type distinguished by subtle color variations. He hums low to himself, tapping the counter rhythmically as he works, not expecting any customer, simply maintaining the routine of organization. You watch how the afternoon light catches the edges of the glassware, making them gleam briefly before the grime of the street dust dulls the sheen again. The meticulous nature of his work, the careful piling and labeling, spells out a slow rhythm, a necessary pause in the day's commerce. It makes you think about the accumulation of these small things. The individual peppercorn, the single jar of saffron threads, each representing distant labor and a precise trade that sustains your immediate life. Next, you move past a baker's corner. The smells shift abruptly from foreign spices to something wonderfully grounding and yeasty. Several large loaves rest on wooden racks, their crusts dark mahogany where they have cooled rapidly in the shade. A slight whiff of coal smoke clings to the air around this particular shop entrance. You observe the rhythm of the bakery itself. A sturdy woman is carefully sweeping up fallen flour dust near the threshold, her movements efficient and accustomed to years of repetition. The act of sweeping seems monumental here, transforming airborne residue into neat little piles for disposal. It is an unconscious performance that keeps the space orderly and ready for the next rush of morning baking. You notice the deep scoring marks on the bread crusts, patterns left by the baker's practiced hands, lines that tell a story of heat and pressure. The collection of evening goods necessitates varied stops. Further along, you see a small stall selling woven baskets and fishing nets. The fisherman, perhaps preparing for tomorrow's catch, is carefully mending a section of twine, his focus absolute. His fingers move with an intricate, practiced patience that seems to resist the passing noise of the street. You observe the coarse texture of the natural fibers under the fading light. They look strong and enduring, built to withstand the water, which itself remains unpredictable. This act of mending is a perfect metaphor for the day's necessary repair, small cuts in material requiring patient attention so that the whole structure remains sound. You pause near one such stall. The basket weaver is demonstrating a pattern to an older gentleman, showing him how the reeds are twisted and bound. You watch the man's hands, strong and gnarled with age, yet still capable of fine detail. His explanation is low, punctuated by quiet gestures toward the material in his lap. It feels less like selling and more like passing down a localized form of knowledge, a tradition passed through the physical objects being worked on. You absorb this sense of embodied history. That knowledge isn't written down, but exists in the memory of muscle and tendon. As you gather these necessary materials for your evening rhythm, perhaps exchanging coins for a few small bundles of good, hearty bread, or picking up a specific length of cordage needed later at home, you find yourself acutely aware of the weight and texture of everything. The coolness of the polished stone underfoot contrasts with the warmth radiating faintly from the loaves you purchase. You examine the slight imperfections in the purchased goods. A small tear in the woven handle, a smudge of flour on the side of a loaf. These flaws are not signs of failure, but rather indicators of life and continued use, evidence that the object is thoroughly integrated into the cycle of human necessity. The entire process of collecting these evening provisions feels like an elegant deceleration. You are moving away from the high-energy transaction of midday commerce and toward a specialized, calming kind of exchange. You notice how the general bustle seems to diminish as the sun continues its slow arc downward. The calling of wares becomes less aggressive, more like murmurs carried on the cooling air. People move with a slightly heavier step now, shoulders seeming marginally slumped in readiness for indoor rest. You reach a quiet pocket near the edge of the commercial zone, where the buildings suddenly narrow and darken, offering temporary sanctuary from the late afternoon glare. Here, the sounds are less varied, more dominated by footsteps echoing on stone and the occasional muffled clatter of a cart wheel rolling over uneven pavement. It is here that you slow down deliberately. You allow your senses to register the complete change in soundscape. The sharp cries of morning life have given way to a deeper, more encompassing texture of noise. The distant bleating of livestock, the gentle sloshing from an overflowing gutter pipe, and the quiet scraping sound of someone dragging a small broom across packed earth. The air here carries the mingled scent of wood smoke, no longer the fresh scent of kindling, but the deeper, settled smell of burning oak and banked embers. It signals that the immediate needs have been addressed for the day, and the focus is turning inward, toward the hearth and the lamp. You contemplate the sheer volume of preparation this entire daily cycle entails. From the cold start in the pre-dawn chill to the intense midday labor, followed by the calculated retrieval of supplies that anchor your evening. It is a deep commitment to continuity. You find yourself studying the stonework of an old archway nearby. The stone itself has been worn smooth over centuries of countless pairs of feet crossing this path. You run your fingertips lightly over the cold surface, feeling the minute grit embedded in the accumulated layers of time and human touch. These marks are a silent record, far more enduring than any written account, speaking only of passage and routine. Your body mirrors this sense of patient endurance. Muscles feel subtly fatigued, not from exertion, but from maintaining the steady, necessary rhythm required to navigate life within these established patterns. This gathering of evening goods, therefore, is not merely a transaction. It is the physical manifestation of preparing your personal corner of existence for its temporary retreat into rest. The knowledge that tomorrow this cycle will begin again, requiring the same measured steps and routine preparations, grants a gentle, stable comfort. You let your thoughts settle on the inherent value in these small acts, the mended net, the fresh loaf, the gathered spice. Each one is weighted with time, effort, and intention. As you continue slowly toward the quieter residential areas near your own dwelling, the sense of completion begins to wash over you, a profound quietude achieved through successful participation in the daily cycle, making every small detail visible once more. The angle of the light changes slowly, without any dramatic flourish. It does not vanish. It simply begins its long, measured slide across the eastern slope of the buildings and down into the low hollows where the thoroughfare meets the river bank. You notice this shift before your conscious mind can name it. The gold that was searingly bright at midday starts to mellowing, losing some of its hard edge. It becomes something deeper, more liquid, pooling in the corners of the alleyways and catching on the rough texture of the stone walls. Walking now feels different than it did an hour past. The steps seem softer underfoot, less echoing, almost muffled by the accumulation of dust and weariness that has settled into the paving stones. You resume your familiar path back toward the residential lanes, but the rhythm is slower now. You do not rush. Each step is placed with a kind of mindful intention. The vivid sounds of the market square are still present. A final call from a hawker, the clatter of wooden wheels. But they seem to drift away, coated in the thickening air that signals the end of the day's great exertions. They lose their sharp edges and blend into a continuous, low hum, like the deep drone of bees settling into their hives. The light itself becomes the dominant presence, painting everything in tones you had barely registered before. The harsh yellow is supplanted by a warmer, more gentle apricot hue, which slowly bleeds into streaks of rose, and then finally into lavender. This twilight coloring seems to deepen the shadows cast by the eaves of the houses, pulling them down and making the outlines of the familiar buildings seem both sharper and more muted at the same time. The stone that felt rough under your fingertips earlier now appears velvety in the low light, dusted with a soft patina of cooling air. You pass stalls that have already begun to dismantle themselves for the day's rest. There is the scent of spices mixed with wood smoke, a sweet, earthy blend that tells you the day's commerce is winding down. You observe how these residual smells linger in the still air, clinging to heavy woolen garments and uneven cobblestones. A particular aroma from a corner bakery, mixing stale yeast with cooling charcoal embers, draws your attention briefly. It is a smell of closure, of things returning to quiet rest. The chatter you hear now is distinctly different from the midday clamor. It is not a burst of sharp transactions, but a murmur, the low conversation of neighbors who pause near an entryway bench, exchanging tales of simple domesticity. You notice the way they speak, the gestures that accompany their words, the lifting of a hand to emphasize a point, the slight dip of the head in understanding. Their voices seem pitched lower, meant to carry only as far as those immediately standing next to them, requiring intimacy rather than projection. As you walk past a small group gathered near an unadorned wooden fountain, your eyes follow the way the last vestiges of direct sunlight catch the scattered droplets clinging to the basin's edges. The water itself seems deeper in this light, not transparent and bright, but shadowed with cool shades of blue-gray, reflecting the increasingly intense purple tones from the western sky. You pause for a moment, watching the gradual way the surrounding noises seem to pool around the fountain's steady gurgle. It is a sound that feels ancient, persistent, reminding you that while human activity ebbs and flows, the basic mechanics of existence, the movement of water, the turning of the seasons, remain constant. You consider how dramatically the simple passage of time affects appearance. The vibrant, urgent reality of morning labor, when every movement was directed toward creation or sustenance, is replaced by a reflective state. You are moving through a canvas that is slowly darkening from sharp colors to subtle gradients. This process feels less like an end and more like a drawing breath in, the deep sigh before settling into sleep. The texture of the air against your skin changes too. It loses the dry heat it might have held during the peak afternoon warmth and gains a slight coolness, a gentle dampness that carries the accumulated scents of the day. Wood smoke from banked fires, the faint tang of river water, and the underlying musk of packed earth mixed with human life. You draw in this air slowly, consciously cataloging its many subtle components. Passing by shadowed doorways, you feel the shift from open view to enclosure. The alleyways become a cool, deep counterpoint to the fading light outside. These narrow passages hold cooler temperatures and deeper sounds, catching echoes that would dissipate quickly in the bright openness of the market square. You walk through one such passage, noticing the stacked baskets waiting for the morning's gathering. Their woven material looks dark and intricate in the deepening shade, contrasting with the brighter, washed-out effect of the distant street lamps which are beginning to flicker into readiness. It is a time built on observation rather than participation. You notice the subtle signs of daily life resuming its quieter patterns. Buckets being carried back from the well, empty carts rolled toward storage areas, shutters slowly being fastened against the gathering night air. These small actions speak volumes about the human need for order and completion, the desire to draw a boundary between today and whatever comes after it. You slow your pace further still. The movement of your feet becomes almost internal, a rhythmic padding that complements the soft sounds surrounding you. You realize that this descent into twilight colors is more than just an optical phenomenon. It is a physiological settling down. Your muscles, which were engaged throughout the day in focused labor and measured walking, begin to ease their tension. Your shoulders drop subtly, and your breath deepens, following the slower tempo of the fading light. Look up now, away from the ground-level commerce and the stone walls. The western sky is deepening into hues of violet and bruised blue, colors that have nothing to do with man's activity, and everything to do with the vast, unhurried process of celestial rotation. These deep colors seem to draw the edges of your thoughts inward, away from the loud exchanges of others, drawing you toward a more quiet form of internal reflection. The day's details, the sharpness of an argument overheard, the specific texture of a carving tool, the taste of yesterday's bread, begin to soften and lose their insistent focus, becoming mere components in a larger, settling whole. You simply walk through this final gradient of light, allowing it to wash over you, letting the twilight colors gently guide your thoughts from the practical routines of day work toward the quiet anticipation of evening rest. You step across the threshold, and the accumulated sounds of the day immediately soften. The air inside is heavier now, warmed by hours of hearth smoke and the gentle musk of cooking oils. It is not the sharp, bracing scent of morning wood smoke, but a deep, settled fragrance of slow-cooked beans mixed with simmering herbs, overlaid with the fainter, more personal smell of beeswax from the lamps you just lit. The journey back to this quiet interior feels like passing through layers of time. The energy expended in the market square and the workshops dissolves slowly, settling into a deep physical ache that makes every small movement deliberate. You move toward the low table set for the evening meal. Light pools softly from several sources, the amber glow of tallow dips catching on earthenware, the more controlled pool beneath oil lamps where your companion has spread out linens. The meal itself is simple and deeply nourishing. There are coarse breads meant to be torn into pieces, perhaps with accompanying chunks of root vegetables that have been slow braised until they yield easily to a fork. Beside the bread, there are bowls of stew, a medley of whatever was harvested or preserved over the last weeks. Thickened broth dotted with small, dark beans and slivers of smoked meat. You sit down at the table, arranging yourself in a rhythm that matches the slow descent of light and energy. You take your first piece of bread. Its crust is slightly hardened from being handled, giving off a faint, dusty aroma when you break it apart. The feel of the rough linen tablecloth beneath your elbows is comforting, worn smooth by many hands before yours. As you begin to eat, the conversation does not erupt. It simply begins, like embers catching smoke. It moves at the pace of chewing and sipping broth. You notice that even the effort of eating requires a kind of quiet concentration, paying attention to the texture of the food, the warmth spreading from your stomach, the way the steam curls briefly into the lamplight before dissipating. You catch yourself observing the faces around you. In the fading light, their features are softened, edges blurred by weariness and contentment, the lines etched around their eyes, those deep creases that only time or repeated moments of shared laughter can create, are not signs of decline to you. They are records. They hold maps of every season past, of every difficult winter endured, of every small success celebrated. There is a quiet acknowledgement passing between you and your companion regarding the day's events outside this room. Perhaps someone mentioned the price of salt at the market, or the unexpected rain that delayed a transaction, or maybe even the passing appearance of a specific type of pigeon in the square. These details are not dramatic anchors. They are simply points of connection, pegs hammered into the shared reality of your day. The conversation unfurls like smoke from an oil lamp. It seems light and unattached, yet it connects everything nearby. You feel yourself drifting back through moments observed earlier. The sun glinting off a barrel in the square, the precise weight of the carving tool in your hand at the bench, the hurried, almost desperate calls of the hawkers as the afternoon waned. While you are speaking about some minor detail, perhaps remembering how dusty the air was near the fountain earlier, you take a slow sip from a wooden tankard. The liquid is warm and slightly bitter, leaving a pleasant coating on your tongue that momentarily quiets any internal chatter or restless thought. You feel the warmth move down into your chest, easing the residual chill carried in from the outer world. The rhythm of the meal settles into something meditative. It becomes less about consuming calories and more about anchoring yourself to a stable point in time. Everything feels grounded by this shared activity. The steady clinking of spoons against earthenware, the gentle scrape of wood on stone as someone shifts their weight, the low hum that forms when several voices speak at once, but never compete for dominance. You pause during the meal and realize how much the light has changed since midday. The sharp, almost blinding angle of the afternoon sun is gone entirely. Now, all illumination seems to come from confined sources: the golden pool of an oil lamp, the muted glow filtering through oiled cloth draped in a window opening. This softer light encourages quiet reflection, pulling your focus inward and toward the immediate presence of others. The conversation now turns even more gentle, shifting away from commerce or external observation. People speak not to report facts, but simply to maintain the continuity of connection. They recall small details about family members passing through, a particularly stubborn patch of weeds that required weeding out near the property boundary, or perhaps the persistent song of a certain bird found in a nearby grove. It is these tiny narratives, these minute threads woven from shared attention, that constitute the core of this evening ritual. They require no dramatic climax and boast no grand resolution. They merely insist upon being acknowledged, recorded briefly against the backdrop of coming night. By speaking them aloud, you are reinforcing your place within a continuing communal story. You notice that while the discussion is quiet, there is an undercurrent of deep historical stability. The issues discussed, the weather, the local harvest, the necessary small repairs to the roof, are timeless. They are the perpetual negotiations between humanity and environment. Your ancestors sat at this very table, discussing similar matters with the same blend of weary competence and enduring hope. The feeling is one of quiet accumulation. Every successful meal eaten, every evening conversation shared, adds another layer of reliable fabric to your life. It suggests that even amidst the sweeping changes of empires or great passing plagues, certain fundamental rhythms, the need for nourishment, the act of gathering together after a day's toil, the gentle exchange of names and memories, remain steadfast. You may find yourself momentarily looking out through the nearest window opening, catching only a glimpse of the dusky street. The world beyond is fading into indistinct shadows, the sounds becoming muffled, absorbed by the coming darkness. You feel that same profound sense of closing down, both physically and emotionally, mirroring the day's slow descent into night. The conversation finally slows again, pulling toward a natural conclusion. A final shared look, perhaps a small gesture of gratitude for the evening's provisions or simply the presence of each other. The residual warmth in the room, the accumulated heat from the hearth, or the lamp, the bodies settled nearby, the rich aroma of cooking oils and spent spices is profoundly comforting. It is the quiet reassurance that despite the vastness of the night pressing against the window panes, you are here together, grounded by shared ritual. The air in the house has cooled after the warmth of the shared meal, settling into a deep, comfortable stillness. You feel the quiet ache of the day's many small movements accumulating in your limbs. The lamplight casts long, shifting shadows against the earthen walls, and every sound, the slight creak of floorboards, the soft whistle of cooling embers, the distant murmuring from the village outside, seems magnified in the relative quiet. Before sleep can truly settle around you, there are still these final tasks. These routines, practiced countless times over generations, provide a gentle structure that signals rest is coming, not with a sudden stop, but with a measured slowing down. You rise gently, moving slowly from your chair by the low hearth. The floor feels cool beneath your bare feet, drawing away the lingering heat of the day's warmth. You walk toward the gathering tools and implements stacked neatly against one wall. There is an inherent satisfaction in this preparation, a quiet acknowledgement that the cycle of work must conclude properly for renewal to begin. You gather the wooden utensils, the kneading board, the carving knives, the small basin used for washing hands. Each item has known weight and familiar texture beneath your fingertips. Examining them, you notice the wear, the dulling patina on the wood from countless years of use, the faint, ingrained stain near the handle of a specific tool, marking its indispensable place in your routine. This wear is not decay. It is history made manifest, a physical ledger of seasons past and tasks completed. You pick up a coarse linen cloth intended for wiping down surfaces. The cloth feels substantial, durable, absorbing any lingering dampness from the day's use. The immediate task at hand is sorting. You begin by rinsing tools carefully in the basin filled with cool, slightly soapy water. You scrub away the grit of the workshop dust that settled into the joints of a joiner's plane, or wipe down the leather residue that clings stubbornly to a knife blade. The running water creates a faint, soothing sound, a soft murmur that fills the space momentarily before receding again into silence. You stand near the hearth again, though this time your attention is not on starting a fire, but on concluding it. You approach the banked ashes where the main coals of the evening had burned down to glowing red coals. These remnants hold both residual heat and potential for tomorrow. Very carefully, you scrape away the ash nearest the grate with a small iron shovel. The scattered flakes of gray ash drift downward, catching the lamplight in brief, soft flashes before settling back into darkness. Next, the embers themselves must be secured. You gently pull a handful of dry, kindling-sized wood, small sticks carefully kept near the hearth for this very purpose. Into a designated receptacle, you place these slender pieces alongside smaller lumps of coal that have not yet cooled entirely. This banking process is crucial. It ensures that when morning comes, the fire does not require starting from scratch. It merely needs attention to be rekindled. The act slows your heart rate and deepens your focus into something almost meditative. You are attending not to grand achievements, but to minute details. The specific way the cool iron meets the warm ash, the slight resistance of a piece of kindling in your grasp, the gentle hiss as you arrange damp materials on the bed of coals. This careful ritual speaks to an unspoken respect for continuity. You are not just cleaning tools, you are reaffirming the order of things. The knowledge that this same process will be repeated when dawn breaks is a comforting surety against the randomness of the night. Life, in this way, becomes a series of dependable transitions. Meal to cleanup, work to rest, fading light to deep dark. You move to the basin again, rinsing your hands thoroughly one last time. The cool water feels restorative. You notice the scent carried by the moisture, a mix of wood smoke residue mixed with soap, and the underlying smell of cooling stone. It is a composite aroma that defines this moment, the closing chapter of physical effort. The final organizational task involves the preparation for sleep itself. If you are not already in your sleeping quarters, you move through the quiet domestic areas. You might draw up the simple mat or adjust the thick quilt upon the communal bed. The texture of the wool beneath your fingers is comforting and familiar. It has absorbed the heat and scent of a day's life, of bodies resting together, of cooked food, of wood smoke. You smooth out the linens, folding them with practiced economy of movement. There is no fanfare here, no dramatic final act, merely an efficient completion of necessary chores that allow the body and mind to surrender fully to rest. Each fold settles another small piece of the day's accumulated activity into perfect order, allowing for a clean slate. The exhaustion now descends gently, not as a sudden crash, but like the deep, pooling dusk that replaces the sky at night, a gradual dimming that softens all sharp edges and loud noises. Your thoughts begin to slow down in tandem with the fading ambient light. You find yourself noticing the way moonlight, if any is coming through the window slit, has begun to trace pale, intricate patterns on the dirt floor. The rhythmic nature of these end-of-day tasks seems to soothe your deeper anxieties. By completing them all, the banked fire, the polished tools, the settled bed, you are mentally giving yourself permission to stop working. You are telling your own mind that nothing critical has been left undone. Everything is secure until morning. The quiet echoes of the day settle into your bones. The last sound you register might be a soft, steady drip from an outdoor trough, or the faint rustle of leaves outside the window being stirred by a slight night breeze. These small, natural sounds anchor you in the present moment, separating it utterly from the memories of the recent hours. You settle into your place on the mat. The warmth of the communal sleeping space is profound, trapping the day's heat beneath thick layers of wool and shared presence. You take a deep breath, consciously drawing in the blended scent of old wood, cooled earth, and sleep itself, a unique domestic perfume that marks the passage from awareness to deep unconsciousness. The last thought is often the softest, the most abstract one, an acknowledgement of the passing day's blessings and simple mercies. You are sustained by these tiny cycles, this dependable flow from waking ritual to necessary rest. The world outside continues its silent turn, marked only by the quiet breathing within your own chest, guiding you toward a profound, restorative sleep. This stillness is not empty. It is densely packed with memory, routine, and the promise of another dawn. The last embers of the fire glow in the hearth, casting a faint, flickering orange light across the earthen walls. The night air pressing against the thick timber frame is finally beginning to lose its sharp edge, settling into a profound, comfortable silence. You rise from your pallet, moving with the gentle stiffness that comes only after a long day anchored by routine. A small patch of cool tile underfoot registers first, reminding you of the passage of time and the coolness held within the structure itself. You feel the texture of your worn tunic against your skin, simple wool that has breathed in countless cycles of sun and shadow. The scent of spent smoke lingers faintly, mixing with the deeper, sweeter smell of banked wood, a comfortable aroma of closure. There is no urgency now, only the slow drawing down of all day's energy. You move towards the single, small window set high up in the wall, its glass panes filmed with dust that seems to hold the last golden traces of the setting sun. The light filtering through it is not bright. Rather, it is a deep, tired violet promising rest. You pause before the sill, tracing your fingers along the cool stone edge. Outside, the sounds have changed entirely since the market square's loud chatter or the persistent clank of metal tools. Now, there is only the steady hum of things settling, the occasional distant bark muffled by distance, the whisper of wind moving through the thatched roof on an adjacent property. It is the kind of quiet that demands careful listening. You notice how the silence itself has weight, a substantial presence pressing against your ears, demanding that you be fully present to acknowledge its contours. This profound lack of immediate noise seems less like absence and more like a deep breath taken by the entire neighborhood as it settles into slumber. You take 3 slow steps toward the threshold, pausing at the edge where the cool air meets the residual warmth inside. The scent outside is cooler now, carrying the sharper, earthy notes of damp ground mixed with the faint sweetness of wood smoke from neighboring chimneys. You draw in this complex aroma deeply, allowing it to settle into the deeper parts of your chest, an inhaled reminder that you are sheltered and still alive. The village remains a quiet constellation of shadows. Smoke drifts lazily up from a nearby hearth, curling against the deepening sky until it is indistinguishable from the rising tide of darkness. You look up, drawn upward by the vast emptiness overhead, the night sky yawning open above the clustered roofs. Your gaze lifts, gradually moving past the curve of the nearest roofline and over the intervening spaces until the horizon separates itself from a colossal expanse of ink-eye blackness, studded with pinpricks of light. The sheer depth of the sky always holds you, suggesting distances far grander than any life lived within these walls or within this winding village. You stand still for a long time, simply letting your eyes adjust to the overwhelming contrast, the soft warmth emanating from your home against the immense, cooling cold of the heavens. There is no guiding movement in the cosmos. It is merely there, vast and indifferent, patterned by ages of celestial turning. The constellations begin to assert themselves, slow shapes drawn across the velvety blackness. You recognize patterns that have been visible for generations, the steady arc of one familiar hunter, or the gentle curve of a river of distant stars. These heavenly diagrams seem immutable, utterly unchanging compared to the mutable flow of human life below. The thought arrives gently, unbidden, a recognition of how very small your day was in comparison to the turning of those celestial bodies. You're passing through the village routine, from pre-dawn fire kindling to market commerce, is but a fleeting breath against the backdrop of starlight that has shone down upon humanity for millennia. You shift your weight slightly, feeling the grit on the stone path beneath your simple wooden sandals. The cool texture reminds you again of the passage of time, of stability versus impermanence. There is a profound comfort in observing these enduring patterns. The sky does not care if you had a good day or a difficult one. It simply continues its slow, inevitable rotation. And within that immense continuity, your own small life finds a particular kind of belonging. The air smells clean up here, scented only by cold stone and the mineral tang of high-altitude night. You notice how little noise there is coming from beyond this moment. No hawkers calling for trade, no children playing tag, just the deep, quiet breathing of the world at rest. You spend a moment noticing the subtle differences in illumination provided by the starlight. It seems to carry its own gentle luminescence, casting soft, bluish halos around the brightest points. It is a light that illuminates detail without demanding attention, a perfect companion for a settling mind. returning your gaze down from the unreachable expanse of space to the immediate foreground. You look at the curve of the low wall bordering the yard. You see your own life reflected in this pattern, a cycle enclosed by predictable structures. The walls of your home, the rhythm of your work, and now, the predictable emergence and setting of these stars. There is a quiet satisfaction in reaching this point of stillness. The daily ritual has been successfully completed, sustenance gathered, craft finished, community observed. Your tired muscles release their tension slowly, settling into the comfortable weariness of having lived another full day on this small patch of earth. You feel the urge to simply sit down and let the quiet seep into your bones. You know that tomorrow, when the first blush of dawn begins to stain the eastern horizon with pale gray, you will rise again. The cycle continues. But for this brief span, suspended between the day's labor and the next dawn's promise, you are simply here, absorbing the deep, cosmic silence, anchored by the enduring glow of ancient stars, allowing